Welcome to APEC. It's November 12th, and I am your moderator, Tim Ventura. I want to thank everyone for joining us on today's very special call, along with everybody watching us on YouTube. In today's session, I will be leading a 2-year anniversary retrospective of the APEC conference. Mark Sokol is going to be providing a ton of overviews. He's going to be going over the Alzofon NMR gravity modification experiment. He'll be demonstrating the Hallbach coil array, Marx impulse gravitator, and Podkletnov impulse experimental replications. Aidan Shaffer is going to be discussing an interpretation of crop circles as a form of communication. Charles Crawford will be demonstrating the Graviflyer replication, and Wayne Ojala will be experimenting with Grebenikov Beetle-Wings. We'll be finishing off the event with open discussion and ad hoc presentations by conference attendees. We also had a request by Dr. John Brandenburg to discuss his latest work into nuclear isotopes on Mars, and Dr. Jack Sarfati asked for the Zoom link as well. Jack is here with us today. He may have some thoughts to contribute as well. So this is a big day. You can view conference replays, details, and speaker info on our website at altpropulsion.com. Please save your questions for the Q&A session after each presentation. You can raise your hand in Zoom using Option Y on Mac or Alt Y on Windows. You can type your questions in the chat. We will try and go through those after each presenter finishes. Okay, so those are my intro notes. Again, we're doing things a little bit different today. This is our 2-year anniversary. So I guess I will start things out. Yeah, so I wanted to go through the events page. So guys, it has been an enormous 2 years. Mark said just go to the last year, but I mean, you know, I figured I'd start out and just kind of run you through everything. So we started out on, was it 11/13? Yeah, November 13th, 2020. So that was just about 2 years. So, you know, we're 1 day short of 2 years. So what I'm going to do is take you back in the time machine. We started out with, it was just Mark, Wayne, Ron Kita, Jeremiah Pop. We had Paul Murad with us. We had Robert O'Keefe popped in. And basically when we first started, it was just kind of, you know, well, how did this thing start? You know what? Let me tap into Mark. Mark, you with us? Unmute yourself.
I'm over here trying to set up a laptop.
How did we start? How do we start this conference?
So this conference started, well, we reached out to you about starting a conference after we got kicked off of Estes Park. And that was late October, early November. And I remember the call. You were a little skeptical at first, and then you started warming up to it. And your first piece of advice was to go very mellow with the setup.
Yeah.
And so the first actual Zoom conference of the style was actually on the 11th of November. And I sent it out on a whim with like 10 minutes advance warning off of my laptop. And just random people got on, and we had discussions about anti-gravity, you know, alternative research for people who chimed in from NASA, Ames. You know, I was just copying like Sarfati's email list and the email list that they were using for Estes Park and a couple other emails that I had, and I just threw out emails to everyone. Hey, do you guys want to jump on this Zoom call? And it was a success. And you weren't even on the first call. The second call was on the 13th. That was the first time we actually called it APEC. There was no invite with any fancy, descriptions of what was going on. So the description sort of followed after the presentation already happened. And then we slowly built up to a more orderly fashion, you know, with the later presentation. So the 13th was actually the second one. The first one was on the 11th. And it wasn't much of a conference. It was more just of a meeting, testing the waters to see, you know, if this is viable. And it was very viable. I mean, if we rewatch the November 13th one, there were points where we couldn't. The energy in the air was palpable. We couldn't get Ron Kita to stop, sharing his wonderful ideas. Everyone just wanted to share.
Yeah, and if I could jump in, I think that Jack mentioned this actually just before we started. I think there's been a sea change. I think it's a paradigm shift. And it's one of those little things that happens, and then you kind of you kind of see it later. But so here I'll take us back to the screen. One of the things was in November 2020, right? You were talking about the pandemic, and so we had spent months collecting toilet paper and laying low. And and you mentioned Jack's list. Jack had people on his email list who were providing updates. It was almost like a play-by-play of the pandemic, and by November, I think all of us were kind of burned out. We were all just kind of exhausted. And so when you guys approached me, part of it was just the reason I said keep it mellow was we were all really just tired. It was kind of like we've reached that point of exhaustion, and we've all started using Zoom for work. And so we started doing this conference, and as it turns out, everyone had video conferencing for the first time ever, right? So you talked about kind of this palpable energy. I think the thing that was really exciting was this community. I mean, for 70 something years, this community has been spread out, communicating with letters and emails and in-person conferences every couple of years. You've had a few people together here, there, and the other place, never everybody together all at once. And so what's interesting was not on that first conference, but definitely on the first or second or third, we were able to start getting everybody in this community together in the same place at the same time. And they were able to share and communicate. And I think that's a tremendous paradigm change. It's just this little subtle shift where everybody's able to kind of get together on the same page. So yeah, that was, we started out then. We got into one of the other things that I was kind of terrified about at the beginning was UFOs, right? Because UFOs have this giggle factor. And so, but you could see by conference number 2, now, maybe I shouldn't admit this, but in the imagery I used for the conferences, I was trying to allude to UFOs without showing them outright. And so that's why you see it in all of these images. So in conference number 2, we had Mark McCandlish, actually, and he did a presentation on the alien reproduction vehicle. I think this was something that he had worked on with Gordon Novell as well. They'd had a big project back when Gordon was alive. And so
he's no longer with us anymore.
Yeah, Mark passed. We also had David Alzofon. David is your hero. Back in the 1950s, David's father, if I remember right, was the 50s or the 70s. Supposedly an AWACS craft picked up radio frequencies from a UFO, and so his father tried to interpret that into this nuclear magnetic resonance approach to gravity modification. And so that's something that you have been working on for the last couple of years now. So we had David on to actually present about his father's work. We also had Mike Gamble on. Mike is a former, career Boeing employee, right? And so that was really exciting. He talked about inertial propulsion, and then Tom Vallone as well, and Tom is one of those people who needs no introduction. He's been a community pillar, right? He is, or at least was, with the patent office. He may have retired already, but he was with the patent office for decades. And Tom has worked on a ton of different energies. He's gotten a lot more into UAPs, UFOs lately. I think that we probably all have. So, we moved pretty rapidly into the UFO space. And as you can see, we just kind of
actually have this is called Easy Alzofon. It was based off of that presentation, the earlier one on the second one in November. And it's the center of the ARV. So we got a large coil here and a spinning aluminum disc that's running on a little motor. And we're going to set this up later today. It's going to be attached to the 10 kV capacitor bank behind me. And we'll see what happens when this is both rotating and the magnetic field is pulsing. Maybe we'll see some dynamic nuclear orientation.
You know,
As-
Mark, that
all
looks
the
really,
time.
that looks like a wonderful, it looks really well built, looks really well constructed. That thing,
Yeah,
that's a beautiful piece of
Aidan
hardware.
Shaffer helped build this when he was down here. Got to
Yeah.
machine it out, and Jeremy Reese just helped me out with some other parts.
That's what a UFO core should look like. I'll put that out there. Yeah, I like it, man. That looks really clean, looks really professional, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, you know, we launched into things pretty quickly, and you know, so one of the things we got into, Paul Murad's Morningstar Energy Box. This one is part of our community mythology, right? The Searle effect, which needs no introduction, and to this day, nobody is sure if John Searle was full of BS or not. But it's one of those things where Searle's original story. For you guys who don't know, Searle's original story doesn't hold together very well. He made tons and tons of claims. I actually corresponded back in the 2000s with a Finnish exchange student who went to England, went to the Midlands, basically researched as much as he was able to. This was, I believe Searle's stuff was in the 50s and 60s. He went there in the 80s, 90s and did the research. So this was decades after, but he was able to find people who remembered him. The story was John Searle had basically this device that he constructed. He would take it to the county fair and he would say, we're trying to build this Searle effect generator. And, you know, if I remember right, he was raising funds to construct it. What the Finnish student said was nobody had ever seen it work, you know, and so it was one of those things where it was you know, people got excited about it, and Searle was doing a lot of showmanship, but nobody was sure if it was real or not. Now, as you all know, there are photos of the Searle effect, the IGV, inverse gravity vehicle flying. Nobody knows if those are real or not, right? There are rumors, hey, maybe he suspended this from a cable, maybe they faked the photos somehow. It's completely possible. You know, but at the same time, Searle said the thing was real. And of course, he was imprisoned for supposedly stealing power. And when he got out of prison, all of his stuff was destroyed, and they've been trying to rebuild it ever since then. So Paul Murad was one of several people who wanted to test this. And actually, he worked on that with John Brandenburg. They worked on that together. Paul got excited about Godin and Roshan in Russia. And Godin and Roshan did a replication of this in the 90s. And they said that when they reached a certain RPM level, they started to see self-spin, right? Which Searle had reported. Now, Godin and Roshan changed the way they constructed it. They did not follow Searle's, you know, very detailed construction blueprints step by step, but they still said that they saw anomalous effects and they started to see self-spin, and they had to apply brakes, if I remember right. So Paul saw that and he said, well, okay, you have this original set of claims, and then now you have this replication, which claimed to see some of the same effects. He built this Morningstar energy box, and they did see some transient weight reductions with this. They tried to do measurements. One of the things that Paul had said was this was a really heavy device, and they had to spread this, if I remember correctly, they had to spread this across several different scales and then average out the weight. Obviously, kind of like Ross's device, when this thing runs, it shakes, right? And so there are always all sorts of challenges trying to measure that. But they did have several spikes that they believed without a doubt were weight reduction. And they did have one period where it looked like there was, it basically lost mass exceeding 20%. So Paul came on and presented about that. Mr. Murad is no longer with us as well. He was, and Paul was a dear friend for years and years and years. So I truly miss him. Then we had John Brandenburg talk about pointing vector anti-gravity. So John did the theory to try and explain what might be going on with the Morningstar energy box. And he believed that pointing vector could explain it. And that's actually an explanation that I've heard in the past. We also had, after that, we had Richard Van Durik come on. I believe Richard is with us today. I think I just saw him, but maybe not. Richard has a DARPA-funded project in relativistic electrodynamics, and he walked everyone through his explanation. And then we had Eric Hermanson on as well, and I think I saw Eric today also. And he talked about Alzofon, superconductive anti-gravity, Van Durik's model, and many other things. So that was right at the beginning. After that, we got into one of my favorite areas, which is high frequency gravity wave engineering and quantum NMR gravity. That's Gary Stephenson. And so Gary and Paul Murad and Bob Baker. Bob is kind of the heir to Robert Forward's work in this area. And so Bob Baker did decades of work on high frequency gravitational waves. Those do follow, what's in relativity. There was always questions about how much of an effect you can produce with this. One of the things that's really exciting about this, and Gary got right into this right at the beginning, was Mr. Jack Sarfati, who was with us today, had said gravitational metamaterials can enhance these effects. And Gary had said, well, okay, if high frequency gravitational waves by themselves aren't strong, what if we apply those using gravitational metamaterials? And so he came up with a model for that. And he felt that basically using the model that Jack had developed, he might be able to create something that would produce, substantial power output levels. So that was number 3. We got into that pretty heavily. As you can see, we're going down the rabbit hole with Tic Tac UAPs. We just keep talking about them more and more and more. We also had Todd, who was with us today. Todd was talking about quantum gravity from atomic resonance effects. This has been a long, ongoing project from Todd. Todd is actually building stuff. He's constructing stuff. He's also been working on a model. And again, this is similar to the Alzofon effect. You guys are kind of getting out of my level of knowledge on it, but I've always looked at those two as being very similar, if not the same thing. And so Todd, you presented on that, and he has done many other presentations on it. Basically, he was talking about utilizing nuclear magnetic resonance to stimulate Lamour radiation. And what he was hoping to create was basically an anti-gravity effect, a propulsion effect, right? Similar to what Mark is doing. Maybe another explanation for what Alzofon saw. So we had that, and after that we started to move. As you can see, we're going down the rabbit hole again. This is all 2021, right? This is right at the beginning. But we had a lot of energy. These conferences at the time, we were seeing 50, 60 people. I'm not sure how many are on today, 53. So, we've developed a pretty solid little community. We got into BAE Green Glow, and I'm really excited about this because Green Glow was one of those things where it has been in the email lists. This was a project that it was BAE Systems. They pursued in the 1980s. They never had the level of funding that projects here in the US have, but Ron Evans and then I'm sorry, his name is on the tip of my tongue, but Ron Evans and Rob Chambers are kind of our two representatives who still remember the Green Glow project. Ron, of course, is a mathematician, but he ended up being kind of the chief scientist on this project. And with Green Glow, it started with a UFO sighting in the late 70s. And Ron was able to go to a friendly, open-minded boss and say, we should start a project to research this. And again, they were able to kind of start this looking at essentially UFO reverse engineering, right? In England in the 70s. Rob Chambers was more on the support side of things, as I've always understood it. And he was working with a lot of the administrative stuff, similar to kind of what I do in many ways. And so they both kind of carried the torch there for the work that was done. And, you know, if nothing else, this was the biggest, best project looking at, you know, alternative propulsion systems ever undertaken in the UK. We also had Nick Pope spoke. He was talking about UAP, UFOs, and government. Nick Pope has been, I think that he has become a lot more popular recently since the UAP phenomena has kind of gone mainstream. And the reason is Nick is able to speak to things from a more reputable perspective, right? He's able to speak authoritatively. Again, Nick Pope was working for the Ministry of Defense in the UK. So he was in England, not in our system, but he is familiar with the structure of how those programs work. And so he's able to speak very authoritatively on how governments investigate UFOs and, you know, and what those things might mean. So let me see. Then I'm going to launch into, this is by, again, only by the end of, was it only by the end of January. So we're only 2 months into it. We've already had that. We had Bill Alec. Bill is with us today. Bill was talking about, let me see. He talked a little bit about the ARV. He was also talking about zero-point energy devices that zero-point energy device that he built from PCM resonators. That was a little bit outside of our sphere at the time. We're still not that much into energy, but that's definitely an area that we're interested in. We had David Chester, and I have Mr. Sarfati's photo there as well. David Chester, this is probably one of the most brilliant physicists I have ever met. Jack, obviously, is also one of the most brilliant. So David got really excited and he talked about quantum gravity engineering, and that's his whole thing. He is a quantum gravity guy. If you ever Google him, you'll find all sorts of information about it. So he ran us through a breakdown of the physics there and you know, basically different approaches to understand how to modify gravity. And then Jack also got involved. Jack and David know each other. And so Jack had described UAPs and Tic Tacs. And that was, you know, again, right at the beginning of it. So then we got into, by February, we were into, let me see, we started out there. We had some shifts around that day. Jean-Francois Geneste, anti-gravity and gravity shielding. So there has been a lot of work in this area, in the UFO area, UAP area, by Guy Pan in France. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. And Jean-Francois Geneste, he was the former vice president and chief scientist at Airbus. And so he was familiar with the Guy Pan work. And he's also had a long-term interest in gravity modification and alternative propulsion. So he came on and walked us through his approach to it, which again was absolutely wonderful to have him. And he was representing some of the work that's been done in France. There's other work as well that we weren't able to get on. We also had Mike Gamble back. Mike was a regular for close to a year, maybe over a year. And Mike had a ton. Now, this one was interesting. Study of the Earth's gravity. That wasn't about modifying the gravity. It was basically Boeing work that was done back in the days of, you know, early satellite deployments. And they wanted to really understand how the Earth's gravity works, so that they could basically more effectively deploy satellites, right? And, you know, and so I remember Mike running through that, and there were lots of just little details that came out of Boeing, you know, and so he managed to capture those. We also had Jeremy Reese, space age materials for spacecraft manufacturing. This was a massive presentation. I'm so pleased that Jeremy was able to present this. One of the things that Jeremy is really good is he's good at aggregating these different ideas. And so what he had done in that one was he literally went through all of the materials that would be involved with building these kinds of craft. And he tried to get, okay, what is it that we're working with? If you're building an alternative propulsion device, you're going to have, an airframe, you're going to have different kinds of drag and different kinds of materials requirements there. And so he tried to look at different compounds. Some of those, he looked at stuff like bismuth and liquid metal compounds. Those might be involved with propulsion systems, right? Like bismuth is one of those magic materials that keeps coming up in the mythology. He also looked at, I can't remember the name of many of them. He looked at structural materials. He looked at basically materials that would go into all different types of propulsion systems, as well as airframes, and help these craft work better. So again, that was, really exciting. And as you can see at the bottom of this, I don't want to leave him out. I will mention him several times. I'll highlight Mark Sokol's open discussion on anti-gravity and out propulsion. So Mark has spoken at every single conference that we've done. He does lab updates for the stuff that is going on at APEC, and he continues to do lab updates, right? They've had ongoing projects. And one of the things that's been really exciting for me is seeing Mark's lab grow. He's got a pretty big lab now. And just last night I was on the phone with him telling him he needs to put down tape lines, make it look more official. So by mid-February, we got into, again, Paul Murad's UFOs and Culture. This came out of a long-term research project that Paul did. And for many, many years, Paul was collecting kind of his best of the best in terms of photos, things along those lines. And what he tried to do was run people through the things that inspired him about UFOs. He also got into UFO propulsion reverse engineering and did a Q&A session on it as well. So this one is worth going back and rewatching. There is that one moment where he pulled a slide from the internet. He pulled an image from the internet to try and highlight what a certain type of UFO looked like. And behind it, there was a CGI X-Wing fighter. And everyone caught that. It was one of those things that you'd think people would miss, but instead everyone saw it. And so I had tons of people going, is that a Star Wars X-Wing? Because it's supposed to be a UFO. And I said, well, he found it online. He was in a hurry to put his presentation together, So, we also had Mark presenting on Alzofon and easy Alzofon experiments, and as well as his anti-gravity propulsion experiments. I'd forgotten on that one. He also did laser deflection. We had laser deflection in water, and I'm not sure. I thought it was on that day as well, but maybe not. I do remember a couple of days where things were exploding, so that may have been further on. So after that, we get into Paul LaViolette talking about the Pace Navy gravity engineering patents. So Paul was basically talking about Salvador Pace gravity engineering. And he went through and tried to review Sal's work in the context of his subquantum kinetics model. So I think it was valuable from a couple of different perspectives. One was just kind of, here's an overview of what Sal's worked with, right? Here's an overview of some of the things he's developed. Two was, here's subquantum kinetics. And three is, here's how it might work in this model, right? So we had that. We also had Mike McCullough discussing quantized inertia and the horizon drive. This was really exciting. I think this is an exciting idea, right? And again, this is kind of, it's too in depth for me to get into here, but I would definitely, if you're not familiar with this, or if it's been a long time and you're forgetting the details, maybe go back and rewatch this or Google it online. The idea is that there's an event horizon for physical effects. And so maybe that could be utilized for propulsion effect. We also had Jeremiah Popp. He did an overview of various gradient field drives. And let me see. He was examining, I have it listed here, T.T. Brown, LaForge, Nasikas, Jean-Louis Naudin, Frolov, Van Duyck, and NASA. So he went through all of those. We had one by SPFL called How to Secure the Future. Now, we now know that SPFL is our very own Michael Perrone. We did not know that at the time. So he ran us through this. I think at the time, I think we weren't ready for this yet. So maybe at some point he will run us through this again. That would be exciting to go through. At the time, we were very laser focused on just the propulsion aspect of things. I think now things have diversified a little bit more. We're able to look at some of the novel insights. He talked about, here it is, topological Tesla coils. He mentioned that a couple of years ago. As well as tic-tac UAP technologies. He was looking at vacuum energy drives. He had also talked about some social trends and things along those lines. And that was the reason why it was difficult at the time to make that fit. But again, maybe we should revisit that. So that was March 6th. We had, let me see, gravity modification in electrets. And so Benjamin Solomon and Ron Kita in this one. So with Benjamin Solomon, he has his own model, and he ran us through his model. He looked at basically how the Podkletnov rotating disk and other experiments like that might help to support his model. He ran us through that, which was really exciting. Again, he is one of those individuals who's been in our community. He's been doing work for a very, very long time. And so it was an honor to have Benjamin Solomon present. Ron Kita, who had been with our conference since the very beginning. Ron is an incredible wealth of knowledge, right? Ron is one of those people who knows so much, he doesn't know what he knows. And so Ron ran us through electrets. He also talked about propulsion using gyroscopes and a bunch of the other ideas that are out there. Ron came on many times back towards the beginning and basically did a data dump. So if you're watching those early APECs, you've got a lot of Ron there just kind of running people through, this is what we've got, right? Okay, so by April, again, year one, I hope I'm not boring you guys. I'm going to have to move fast here. Otherwise, this could end up being a 2-hour talk. We were blessed to have Roger Scheuer come on. Yes, Roger Scheuer, the creator of the EM drive, right, in popular mechanics, popular science. I mean, the EM drive was everywhere for a few years. Critics have come out and said it doesn't work, but those same critics have found other reasons why it might work. So it's one of those things that ends up being, again, it just needs more testing. It may or may not be related to what Sonny White was doing at NASA. Many people have said that it was. So Roger Scheuer has been working on this thing for many years. He came on and gave us an in-depth presentation on it. I do remember there was one substantial critic who said that it won't work for reason X, Y, or Z. I don't recall what. Scheuer actually rebutted that during the conference, and that made it into, if I remember right, it was Popular Science Online. They published his rebuttal there. So, again, these ideas are discussed and debated. Experimentation is really what validates a lot of them at the end of the day. And in Roger's case, it was just an honor to have him with us. And, I hope over time, I hope that more testing provides more validation for his work. We had John Clymer came on, and he was talking about the material universe. This is more of a hypothetical model. It's a scientific model. It's kind of a computer science model for physics. That's what interested me about it. It's how can we reformulate physics so that it's a little bit more formulaic, I guess, in its approach. And Amar Vakil did modeling and analysis of the information universe. Again, with both of these gentlemen, they've been working together. It was an honor to have them on. the idea was, can we simplify and streamline physics so that it can be understood and computed more effectively, right? One of the challenges, of course, is there's such a vast body of work that's already been done in existing models and theories that when you reformulate, you're really kind of starting from scratch, trying to fit pieces in, you know? So they have a lot of challenges, but also, you know, a wonderful effort and tons of work that went into it. So then we got into, let me see, I believe Catalina UAP sightings. We had Michael Boyd. He did his presentation on UAP and gravitomagnetism. Michael should be here today. I think he's here. He may or may not. He's here just about every time. He is a super regular. Michael has been a massive blessing to this conference. He's just this wonderful, uplifting voice. He's very supportive. And you know, he's presented many times. So Michael also is an infrared. The title escapes me, but he specialized in infrared systems for many years. And so when it comes to UAP, he has his own model for gravitomagnetism, and he was able to try and fit UAP into that model as well. And one of the other things that he has always been more than happy to discuss is how those black and white crummy UAP videos can be understood better in the context of the IR systems that we use to film them. And he has worked on those IR systems in depth. He has expertise there. So then we also had Frank Milburn. And Frank, I absolutely love Frank. Frank is one of those, you could think of him like as an investigative journalist. That's how I think of him. Again, Frank is a true blessing. He's with the SCU. He's been with the SCU for quite a while. And Frank is really good at digging for data, right? So he was the author of the Pentagon's UAP task force. I first heard about this on Jack Sarfati's email list. And what Frank did was he went through and did just this incredible amount of research. In that document, it cites Jack very heavily. It also cites Eric Davis. He went through and basically tried to get the more credible people there and tried to take the best theories and organize them into a single paper. Again, this was discussed on Jack's list for quite a while. That's how I met Frank. Frank later did, excuse me, he later did the American Development of UAP Technology, a fait accompli. So that was kind of the follow-up. That second paper didn't get the publicity that the first one did. Basically, it was a drill down more into reverse engineering. He was asking, are there black projects that attempted to reverse engineer this? Did they have any level of success? The information was a little bit more difficult to get, I think, in some ways. And in some ways, it was a little more speculative than the first people. But again, Frank, you know, he's been an absolute blessing. The Catalina UAP sightings was one of several presentations that he's done at APEC, where he would take a specific case that was exciting to him and dig and say, here's exactly what was seen, how it was seen, how it all came together. So Catalina obviously has been a hotbed for UAP activity. That's near the area where the Nimitz encounter occurred. It's near the area where the USS Kidd encounter occurred. It's also there's UAP activity that goes back decades there. As it turns out, people in that area showed no surprise whatsoever that UAPs have been sighted there. The rest of the world was kind of surprised, but to them, they said, no, that's been happening for quite a while. Todd Desiero presented derivation of gravity from the uncertainty principle. Again, Todd has done several presentations. I am so thankful. Todd has been one of those folks who has always had something where he could fill in, right? And it's like, you know, hey, Todd, we're trying to schedule things. Can you help us out? And he's like, yeah, I can do this, you know? So, you know, hopefully he'll be able to continue doing that in the future. I know that he is working on, he is not going to demonstrate it today, but Todd is working on an ion drive. I have seen it. It looks really cool. And so in the next, hopefully in the next month or so, he'll be able to present that for us. And then of course, more every session by Mark, right? Who continues to build and work and refine things. Okay, so man, I'm just tired going through this. I'm gonna have to go through again. I'm gonna go faster, guys, because I want to keep up on time here. We have a lot of them. Tom Vallone, electrogravitics and electrokinetic propulsion. I would say that when it comes to T.T. Brown, when it comes to kind of historical perspective of standard electrokinetics, electrogravity, Tom is probably the best historian out there. I believe, I'm positive that he's written books on this.
Tim,
Yes.
Bill Alec has his hand up. This was supposed to be open discussion, by the way, where we could all talk and reminisce about these past things. And it'd be better if we went overtime, because there is no way anything is going to be ready in the next 20 minutes here.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's do that then.
So how about you unspotlight yourself and just allow anyone who's talking, or we could get like a panel of people up to discuss these past conferences. I wanted to hear from Jack how it was before APEC, because he had his email lists. And before that, there was also snail mail conversations between these researchers. Jack's been at this a long time.
Okay. Well, so let's start with Bill. Bill, your hand's up. What you got?
Yeah, Tim.
Yeah. What's going on?
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned what's his name? Ron Ryan from Greenglow.
Ron Evans from Green.
Oh, Ron. Yeah, he gave a presentation. I thought it was rather interesting because he put up some gravity equations. And I was wondering, maybe you can invite him back to maybe go into a little bit more detail about that.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah, that kind of caught my interest.
Okay. Yeah, I can ask. So, and then let me see, Mark, what did Mark have? Sorry, Mark, are you still there? Okay. Well, so yeah, again, if you have other things to share, just, jump on in and I'll just kind of keep going. So again, Tom is definitely.
Yeah, Michael Boyd.
I'm sorry, sorry, who's there?
You were talking about Mr. Boyd. He's definitely here.
Yeah, no, he is. Well, so guys, do you want me to just open this up? We just have open discussion. You want to do that? Let's do that. Okay.
I don't know. I think you're doing a pretty epic job there, Tim, giving a rundown of the history.
Oh, okay. Well, hell, yeah.
I'm curious about what was going on before APEC. I'd like to hear from Jack about that. He brought that up. That would be okay.
Oh, Jack's muted if you're trying to talk, Jack.
Yeah. Well, I'll switch things around.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I don't remember. There was never any snail mail. I mean, because I've been on the internet since 1990, early 1990s, 1991, 1992. So I've been using snail mail for 30 years. And we didn't really get into the UFO thing until Joe Firmage. What happened was 1999, somehow or other, I was contacted by Joe Firmage, and he had $24 million that he invested. And it didn't lead anywhere because he didn't actually listen to us. But I was involved in it with, with Hal Puthoff, Creon Levitt, Larry Lemke. Who's that other guy? Who's the guy that Hal wrote his 0-point papers with, his PV papers with? I forget now. The guy, he was well, in any case. And that didn't really lead anywhere. We spent a lot of money testing all these people's designs, and none of them worked. And at that point, the metamaterial was not really, in fashion. And I'm looking back on my notes, my technical memoranda from like the year 2000, and I started looking at like little lattice arrays, networks of small LCR oscillators. And I don't know why I was doing that, but basically it's it is like a metamaterial lattice. But I really did not have the basic idea of what was really needed in terms of general relativity until 2011, when I was involved again with with Creon Levitt at NASA Ames and General Pete Worden, and I was in the organizing committee, about 30 people. I guess maybe in 2010, maybe it was 2011. I'm not sure, but to set up the 100-year Starship program with
I'll be right back.
yeah,
guys.
with DARPA and NASA, and so at that time, I don't know, and I don't remember now how I got the idea, but I got the idea of using metamaterials to amplify the coupling between the applied stress energy electromagnetic field input and the induced gravitational field output, using just Einstein's 1916 field equation. That the induced gravitational field is a coupling times the input stress energy tensor of your source. Oh yeah, I remember how I got that. The idea was, oh yes, okay. The idea was very simple. It was crude. It wasn't quite correct, but that's the way these things happen. If you read Arthur Kessler's book Sleepwalkers, he explains how people just stumble into correct ideas with initially wrong ideas. I had known that Bose-Einstein condensates, like the atomic gases, but at very low temperature, that they slow down the speed of light to practically zero. And then, I realized the problem is that when you read general relativity books, all these theorists who are mathematicians want to be physicists, but they're really mathematicians. For the sake of mathematical elegance, these guys set the speed of light equal to 1. Sometimes they even set Newton's constant, big G, equal to 1, just to get to them. So they have that, their Einstein equation is that the gravity field, which is what's called the G mu nu, the big G mu nu tensor, is equal to the big T mu nu. And the coupling is 1. They forget about the coupling, okay? They forget, which is pretty damn stupid, but of course they're mathematicians. So almost everything you read in the mathematical literature on general relativity is completely misleading and almost irrelevant to the problem of understanding UFOs. And of course, nobody believed in UFOs then anyway, right? In fact, at the DARPA meeting in, I guess it was October 28th, around that time in Orlando, Florida, of the DARPA NASA 100-year Starship project, General retired of the Air Force Space Command, Pete Worden, paid my way down from San Francisco down to Miami, out to Orlando, to give this invited talk. And the name of the talk was Low Power Warp Drive Using Metamaterials. This is, how many years ago? Almost 11 years ago now, right? And I talked about UFOs. Now, so Eric Davis is there, who's, which is surprising. Eric Davis was kind of dumb. Oh no, we want to talk about UFOs. Eric Davis was like, putting an obstacle in my path and talking about it. And John Kramer, who was the head of the meeting, and some other people too, and they didn't want to, oh no, UFOs, that's not legitimate, which is kind of interesting since Eric Davis is a big guy in UFO research, right? But I think the reason for that was that Eric was trying, finagling with the money, trying to get money from DARPA, and the writer that mentioned UFOs, was like, oh, well, that's crackpot, that's, the woo-woo factor, right? So that was very evident. And the only guy who defended me on this was Doug Trumbull, the guy who did the special effects on Space Odyssey, Kubrick, Kubrick's film Space Odyssey. He was there. And Doug Trumbull is a UFO researcher. In fact, Doug Trumbull had mobile SUVs with all this equipment to track UFOs, with cameras and latest stuff. He had put some of his own Hollywood money into such a project. He was there, actually, at my invitation, with Pete Worden. And so that's what the idea of low power warp drive using metamaterials as a kind of amplification of the coupling. Since the speed of light, the idea is that metamaterials can be combined with what are called Further condensates. So you have it's like a Bose-Einstein condensate, but it's non-equilibrium. It only happens when you pump the system resonantly, sort of like pumping a laser into a coherent state. Very similar idea that the metamaterials have what are called like plasmon collective excitations, and they're bosons. And if you pump it sort of like a laser, where a laser you get a coherent state of photons, but in the metamaterial you get a coherent state of these kind of like these quasi-particles or elementary excitations that are bosons, and that that effectively will lower the speed of light since it's g over c to the 4. That when you make c small, and it's the 4th power in the denominator, that the coupling should go up. That's the basic idea. Now it turns out it's more complicated than that, but that was the initial idea, very naive initial idea. There are problems when you do that. You have to make sure that everything is mathematically kosher, that the equations still obey the laws of tensor calculus, and that introduces some complications, which I'm not going to go into here. So that's basically the story. But everything was by email. So I don't know why you said snail mail. Snail mail was back in the 1980s, and we weren't. Yeah, I was talking a little about UFOs, but it was very primitive back then. So you may have gotten the snail mail idea from, if you read David Kaiser's How the Hippies Save Physics, he does talk about all of the Ira Einhorn, the snail mail, and the groups of, talking about all this kind of weird stuff.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, Jack, I think one of the things is, looking back at the history of this, right? As a community, as a group of people who have an interest in the same thing, one of the things that I've seen is like stuff was typewritten, right? Lots of typewritten stuff going around, people buying stuff out of the back of Popular Science. I wasn't thinking of snail mail with you specifically, but I was just thinking, different people emailing letters to each other with equations and physics and books, and I mean, that was back in the day, right? And I remember.
it didn't really get seriously into UFO part. I mean, I was always into UFOs because of my contact experience as a kid, right? I'm an experiencer. Like Gary Nolan is an experiencer.
Yeah,
Jim
yeah.
Semivan of the CIA, who works with Elizondo and Chris Mellon, they're all experiences, right? And that's how I got into it when I was 13 years old. Well, I was also into it because the Army, basically, I was in an Army program for kids, U.S. Army program for kids, starting already in the late 1940s in New York. And I'm pretty sure I met Colonel Phil Corso at that time when I was about 10, 11 years old. So I was already being groomed to do this anyway. I was sent to an Ivy League school, Cornell, on government money, and already they were telling us about UFO flying saucers back when I was in high school with these guys from Albuquerque. These guys, these not men in black, men in blue suits, would come. I was part of this special program out of Columbia University with the Super Kids project, and they were. It was kind of like the X-Men. They were testing to see if we had paranormal ability, like Uri Geller. But this is back in the 1950s already. So,
Jack, do you remember duck and cover? Did you do duck and cover when you were a kid?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, that was pretty standard back then, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I guess what other thoughts and memories from these early conferences do you guys have? I think that was what Mark had asked for. I mean, pretty much I would say the vast majority of people who have here have contributed in one way or another to those. What are some of the memories that you guys have? And and if you want, I can go back in. Do you want me to go back in and start running through more of the conferences? I can run through some of the recollections of highlights, I guess, if you want.
Well, I mean, I can talk about being over in Falcon Space with Mark, back.
Yes, please, Tim, do finish off like all of the history before we move on, because that was a pretty epic thing.
Okay,
like
well,
how
let
you're
me
doing it.
Yeah, let me do that then. Let me do that. Okay, well, so yeah, I'll share my screen again. And again, I'll try and move fast, guys. Yeah, so again, I went through Tom Balone, electrokinetics. And Tom, I would say in terms of the history of this, right? Because Tom is a wonderful historian. He has done more of the history than probably anybody. Tony Robertson. So Tony worked on the superconductor Podkletnov replication at NASA, and it wasn't a complete replication. They didn't exactly do what Podkletnov had recommended. If I remember correctly, they had trouble getting the superconductor to the correct size, and they weren't able to get it up to the same spin that he had. And there were some other factors as well. I believe Podkletnov was applying I believe he was applying a waveform to it. And I'm not sure if NASA knew about that or did it at the time, even though he kind of helped them. We also had more from Mike Gamble. Again, Mike has this wealth of knowledge, and a lot of that comes out of Boeing stuff. We had Frank Ferguson. I almost forgotten about that. So his father was part of the 1952 UFO flap, the invasion of Washington flap, and he described his dad's recollections for us as well. So let me see. I believe, let me take a look. Okay. Yep, that's the one we were just on. So let's go to UAP debrief and gravitomagnetic engineering. So Jeremy Reese did the UAP debrief. Again, when Jeremy puts together a presentation, he's able to put together these wonderful, enormous, incredibly detailed presentations. The UAP debrief was the same thing. Basically, he was describing the UAP story and how it relates to gravity modification, anti-gravity, reactionless propulsion. He touched on a lot of historical points, Pentagon report and DoD Inspector General stories. Obviously, more has come out since then, but at the time, that was, it was a wonderful, detailed one. Gary Stephenson also did a UAP update and gravitomagnetic field generation. Again, if I recall correctly, this related to Jack's work, and he was also talking about lens thirring effect. So then moving on from there, we had, let me see, guys, we have covered so much stuff. Mark Sokol, Chris Hardiman's anti-gravity lab. And I remember Chris's widow there with the Guns N' Roses t-shirt. That for me, I was like, yes, there we go. So Chris he was developing a bunch of lab equipment. And when he passed, his widow contacted Mark, and they went over and took a look at what Chris had. We also had Benjamin Solomon came back and provided more of his research. Jason Verbelli. So Jason has been working on the Searle effect. He actually has never presented on the Searle effect here, but that is one of the things where he has drilled down. That's part of his subject matter expertise. Ton of historical research. If I recall correctly, he worked for Searle. There are a couple of folks who have some expertise there. So he basically he described the model of Dr. Edward Dowd, and it was based on Galilean transformations. And then we had Mike Gamble presenting on the Dean drive and rotating mass systems. For anyone who doesn't know already, Mike is an inertial propulsion person. That's his focus. I mean, through and through. And that's his true passion. So getting into this, we had, moving on, Rob Chambers presented on Green Glow. As I mentioned earlier, so Rob worked with Ron Evans, and Rob had kind of an administrative role, as I recall correctly, kind of similar to what I do, right? And so he's helping support the work of others. And Rob basically described his involvement in it. He also basically described the project and some of the things that were done in the UK Green Glow program. Then we had more by Frank Milburn and Nick Pope. They did a panel discussion talking about the emerging UAP story, which again continues to move forward. I think we're in a little lull, but I'm expecting probably in the beginning of the year, we'll see more on UAP. So going forward, Detlef Hoyer, space travel by reduced effective mass after induced matter theory. So Detlef is a Kaluza Klein fan. And I think Kaluza-Klein is really interesting. Kaluza-Klein is somewhat related, and Jack may beat me for saying this, but it's somewhat related to Einstein's unified field theory. And the idea is that by basically adding extra dimensions to these theories, that you're able to describe these higher order effects more effectively. And so that's something that he had talked about. I did the ODNI UAP report. This was just kind of a catch up. This was the, let me see, Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Again, this stuff is kind of getting dated now, right? I mean, we've had so much movement on UAP since we did these. Then we had Matthew Sadaugas, Dark Matter and Dark Energy. Matthew Sadaugas is one of the key researchers in the world on dark matter right now. That's and in fact, he is doing an experiment currently on dark matter. It had a negative result, but it kind of points a path forward. So they're still looking for it. And so he described, you know, kind of the goals and the approach in their thing for that. Brian St. Clair, it was wonderful to have Brian. Brian is an inertial propulsion guy. The thing that's exciting about Brian's work is when you see a lot of inertial propulsion devices, right? This is something people are actually building. A lot of these are really, you know, lightweight, right? Not Brian. I mean, the stuff he's building is like battle tanks, right? I mean, it's like heavy duty gears, custom welding. I mean, it's a true miracle. And so it's really exciting to have Brian on when he presents his stuff because it's so heavy duty. It's just really exciting. Okay. So moving along, Feynman's disk and gyroscopic propulsion. Remy Cornwall. It's always wonderful to have Remy with us. I don't think he's with us today. So he was talking about EM propulsion via static E cross B fields, right? And Remy has also done a lot of work on quantum entanglement, quantum communications. So that's exciting. Sandy Kidd, I don't know if you guys remember him. Sandy, it was so exciting to have him with us. I didn't even know his name, but if you remember, this is one of those stories that's a legend, right? And this goes to the gyroscopic precession idea. And I had heard, this goes back to like the mid 90s. I'd heard about this guy who was taking a gyroscope out of a plane. And apparently when he was carrying this still spinning gyroscope down, he hit a step too hard. The gyroscope went into precession and supposedly it augured the gyroscope and the man into the ground, right? That man was Sandy Kidd. So that's one of those legendary stories. It was so wonderful to have him with us. And then we had more Frank Milburn and myself. Let me see, and then Mike Gamble. Let me see. I see John's hand up. Mr. Brandenburg, what can I do for you, sir?
Oh, wonderful to be here, and it's really great to hear everybody. I just wanted to commend you for recognizing the contributions of the late Paul Murad. He was a great man, and basically went around looking for people with strange ideas about gravity and recruiting them.
Yeah.
And he also organized the later STAFE conferences where everybody could come and present their ideas in a very open forum. So he did wonderful things for this whole effort, and for me personally, he basically really assisted me in, you know, we're on the edge of we're all on the edge of human advancement, and for a career physicist, that means life gets a little edgy sometimes. And Paul was always very helpful in, you know, with employment opportunities and things like that for me. And we will miss him. We will miss him sorely, but he really helped in the development of my jam unification theory, which is derived partly from Kaluza-Klein. And also, by the way, connects with the idea of gravity can be derived from the uncertainty principle, which is really gives you the electromagnetic ZPF of vacuum, an idea of originally of Andrei Sakharov, which was then picked up and carried forward by Podkletnov, another very great person. Wish he was here today. And but anyway, so thank you for recognizing the contributions of Paul Marat.
Oh,
Great,
absolutely.
truly a great man.
Absolutely. Here, I'll stop sharing again for a moment. Well, John, one of the things, if I could just say something about Paul, in a way, and maybe this isn't coming out right, so maybe I should apologize in advance. But with Paul, it's like the phrase that comes to mind is in our community, it tends to be all chiefs and no Indians, right? And what I mean by that is, like, well, yourself, you're a physicist. Jack is a physicist. We have
Right.
many physicists. We have many people building things. We have lots and lots of innovators, and so it's like, what is the lack in our community? Our lack is really the support infrastructure,
Yes.
And I think that was where Paul shined. And that's one of the things that I've taken away from him as well. In a weird way, not to untoot my own horn, but you don't hear me offering theories. And one of the reasons is it would be pointless. There are so many people who are so much better suited at theories, and so many people who are so much better suited at building things, right? And so it's like,
pencil and paper is a lot cheaper than hardware. I salute these people who are trying to actualize these ideas in hardware. That's pretty hard. Sitting in one's office and working on pencil and paper or a keyboard, that's pretty easy.
So in Paul's case, he was the joint chair of the STAFE conference, right? In this section F of the STAFE conference. He also helped. Most folks don't know this. He also helped hundreds, maybe, of scientists. He would help go through their papers before peer review submission. People would send these papers to him, and he would basically talk to them and work with them and try and correct physics errors when he was able to find them. He wasn't a physicist. He was an aerospace engineer.
He was an aerospace engineer.
Yeah, but this was his passion project, right? And so in a strange way, I think what I remember the most about Paul is he was a community organizer, and he helped support the people doing the work. And that was, again, that's a real blessing, because.
Well, I want to point out, he also made a large Searle effect kind of experiment under the vehicle of Morningstar Applied Physics. And
yes,
jointly formed with Morgan Boardman, and who now resides in the UK. And the thing did lose weight, lost about 7% of its weight, and it was big and heavy and well engineered. Though they spun that thing up in a bomb-proof room at Orbital Technologies, and I thought, oh, the whole thing's going to come apart, but it didn't. And then it lost a small amount of weight based on the load cells on the supporting structure. So some people who worked with him closely at Orbital Technologies complained to me that he was rather abrupt and brusque at times. And I said, well, you must understand, Paul Marat used to jump out of perfectly good airplanes. He was a former paratrooper, and that he kept that attitude. I also told him, I said, he trims his mustache so that it looks like a permanent frown, so he can frown without any extra effort.
Paul was a New Yorker, right?
Oh, he was a tough guy.
Yeah. So
And very, very Armenian. He was very Armenian, you know, the Armenian thing, it kept coming up in conversations.
Yes.
So anyway, I just wanted to thank you for saluting him.
Oh
He's a
yeah,
Truly
absolutely.
great man.
Well, you know, I
He
want
helped
to
my
salute,
research immeasurably.
I want to salute everyone who has contributed to this conference. I mean, again, the thing that this is the first time that we've been able to get this community together in the same place at the same time. And you know, it's just like, look at how much has come out of that. And then by putting these archives up online, how much more will come out of that in the future, right? Because
Oh, absolutely. We're just beginning.
you know what, so
And
one of the
Jack,
things
you're gonna see it all come to pass, Jack.
what when I was a kid, okay, when I was a kid, I did a lot of my research at the Western Washington University, and they're not a big engineering school, so it wasn't the best place. But when I wanted to find physics theories and things like that, when I was looking for these you know, novel ideas, I remember I used to go, and you guys have probably all used these too, card catalog, right? So I would go down to this big room in the library downstairs, you know, in the engineering building, and pull out these wooden card catalogs that have been there since the 50s, I think. And, you know, and then you pull out and it will tell you, okay, here's the book that I want. Here's the author. I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to go up to this one, you know, and so I would do that. And then I would have a big bag full of change for the photocopier. And you know, at the time, those photocopiers, this was a big, scary, you know, monstrosity of a photocopier. And so I would go up, get the book, photocopy 50 or 100 pages. You know, I would do this for 10 or 15 books and take them home. And, you know, and it was because, you know, I was always at my limit for checking out books there. And so,
sure.
you know, and for years I had this box of papers at home, right? And I'm sure that you guys all have these too. It's this big box of like, here's really important stuff. And, you know, good God, I'm not going to leave this at the library. I'm going to photocopy this and take it home. Well,
yeah, my wife's always trying to get me to throw that out.
Yeah, exactly. So
two divorces.
Think about what we're, you know, and think now that there's a benefit to that. I think there are tangible benefits to that, but think about what we're able to give to that next generation, right? Think about that kid who's out there right now in college, and instead of having to go through that and only get a tiny bit of information, they're able to get everything that this community has.
I love modern life. I love it.
You know,
Tim, before we get too further down the road, I wanted to backtrack to Paul Murat and his last Kofi presentation at or the Kofi presentation in 2017, and he talked about the Morningstar energy device, and he made an odd comment that part of it was aluminum, and after being used in the device, the aluminum was magnetic temporarily. So I'm trying to
remember if he
John would know, but John helped him with it.
So actually no, if that happened, he did not discuss it with me, but that was okay.
Okay, and then maybe that's lost in
his cards close to the chest. That was fine by me.
Yeah, it was the 2017 Kofi presentation hosted by Tom Vallone. So it may be recorded for posterity's sake. Yeah, it was just a very shocking discussion or statement that he made, and he was very upfront about it. So
what interests me is the Searle effect generator. Again, every time I've looked for serious research on the origins of that story, it always comes back and it says, you know, that the story is probably not real, right? Searle was probably some kind of well, for lack of a better word, you know, a charlatan, right? That's but yet, even based on that,
a rascal perhaps, but not a charlatan.
Yes, a rascal. Everyone who has built,
important distinction,
everyone who has tried to do a replication of the Searle device, none of these have been perfect. They've all tons of shortcuts, right? Including Paul, right? They always change things. They're always like, well,
I know, I would talk to Paul, I'd say, Paul, you're changing stuff on this experiment. You're changing several things. And he
Yeah.
says, well, we don't have that much time, and, our budget is, and I said, well, you should be changing one thing at a time and then doing, differences between those two experiments. And he just gave me that look,
So
that paratrooper look. And
every time,
just said, no, John, we got to do it the way we're doing it.
yeah, and that's what intrigues me. And it's not just him; it was Godin and Roshan, and I believe, let me see, Paul Brown up in I think Idaho. Paul Brown did an SEG replication in the 80s.
Yeah.
And his, if I remember right, with the Paul Brown one, I believe, and he took shortcuts with it. If I remember correctly, what I'd read was, it began to self-spin and it generated so much heat that it ended up melting down. The neodymium actually caught fire, if I remember correctly.
Oh dear.
So
We
again,
did our experiments in a bomb-proof room used to test rocket engines.
Yeah.
At Orbital Technologies, which has now been taken over by Sierra Nevada Aerospace.
Well, guys, let me run through a few more of these. We'll see how far we can get here. Because now, as Bernie kind of alluded to, now that we're into it, I want to see how far we can get. But so yeah, let me see. That was 7/10 to July 31st. We're getting there. I'll run through them real quick. And if you guys have stuff, just jump in. So this Granziera, Zanotti, and Loretti, this was an Italian research team. They were working somewhat independently, kind of outside of the community. And so the impression that I got was the ASPS in Italy, that's kind of their own working group. It seemed like there was a fair amount of overlap with what's being done primarily in the United States. But the information sharing could be better. And, hopefully over time it will be. But it was wonderful that they showed up. The reason I mentioned that is they talked about the PNN, right? And offhand, I can't remember how this device worked, but I remember that it was very similar to a well-known design here. And so I kind of got the impression they were reinventing the proverbial wheel. We had Stephen Lutz, and Stephen, again, he's been in this area for quite a while. He presented on superconductors. Kenneth Griggs on Phoenix theory. This is one that Jeremy Reese had talked about many times. He said, you got to get Ken Griggs on, And so it was really exciting to have him on. And then Remy Cornwell talking about the cosmological constant as well. Okay. And you can see with this, I started running out of stock art by this time. That's in case you guys are wondering, man, why is Tim doing this? That's because Tim's like, okay, well, let's find stock art. We've used all the good ones. So I like it though. It's kind of trippy, and I think what we're doing is about dreams, right? So that was a good one.
Sure.
Steve Burns, System H. This was another one of those long-term myths. So Fran D'Aquino, System H. The idea was you have an antenna and you have a super low frequency. Let me see, 1.2 hertz, right? 1.2 hertz. So that's below even Tesla's 8 hertz frequency for the Earth. And Fran D'Aquino for quite a while, in around 2000 to like 2004-ish, people were talking about his stuff all the time. And it turned out that the problem was building an antenna. So Steve Burns was kind of the American expert on this, I guess. He worked with D'Aquino very closely, and he came on to describe his work there. So again, it was wonderful to get him on. This was one of those ideas that was out there for quite a while. It's a very innovative and different approach. And so he was able to kind of describe what was going on there. Daniel Sheehan talked about second law of physics and Maxwell's demon. This, I think, is an interesting area as well. Limitations of the second law of thermodynamics. So, he went into the fact that you can defy the second law for short periods of time. and maybe the second law isn't as universal as we've thought, right? So that's one that's worth looking at as well. What that reminds me of is Paul Thibodeau's energy converter, the graphene energy converter, where it's converting Brownian motion to energy. It's the same thing. It's maybe the second law isn't completely universal. It's just conditional, right? And that we always see it because of the where we're at in time space, but maybe it can be broken.
Well, Tim, I would just point out that once you admit the ZPF, the sea of electromagnetic energy around here that must be there because of the uncertainty principle and it's quantum in its origin, then there's always a suspicion that perhaps you can find a way to tap into that, and that in itself would kind of give you what appeared to be a violation of second law of thermodynamics. Holistically, you're getting quantum ordering interacting with the real world that we experience, and that increasing the entropy of the whole universe as a whole, even though it looks like you're actually creating ordered energy in the lab, you're actually just, but of course the theory of that I haven't explored in detail.
So Remy Cornwell also got into the second law. He talked about that as well. So this was 814. This was Tesla Tech. This was the first time, if I remember right. I want to highlight all of these for you guys. So one of the things that makes our conference unique is that we crash other conferences. I've never heard of a conference crashing other conferences before. Again, the things that you can do with Zoom are amazing. And so we've managed to find out every possible way that we could abuse the internet, and crashing conferences while they're in session, that is one of them. So we crashed Tesla Tech. Actually, I'm going to blame all of this on Mark. We did a couple others as well, but I think
I saw Mark Sokol at the last
excuse me,
and his lovely assistant at the last Tesla Tech conference in Albuquerque.
Yeah. So they did Tesla Tech live there. And we're at 123. So actually, I think mine, what I'm going to do is try and wrap this up by 2, and then we're going to go to Mark, and it's going to be all experiments. And John, hopefully 3, maybe 4, and then I would love to have Jack just present as well.
All right.
But
we'll see what Jack has to say.
Yeah. So let me go into.
People ask me, they tell me you don't know Jack, and I say yes, I do.
Okay. So UAP physics and NASA superconductors. Okay. UAPs and nukes. For anybody who hasn't seen this, this was my take. There's a ton here. So Robert Hastings, that's the name that I want you guys to remember. If you haven't looked his stuff up yet, he has a book. You can get the Kindle. It's called UFOs and Nukes. And if you can't find it, I probably have a copy of it. I know I have a copy, but I have to find it myself. This is basically, he spent his career looking at the UAP nuclear correlation, and it's amazing. I mean, there's no doubt. And this is something that Elizondo had talked about, and Hastings has decades on anything that Elizondo knew there. So yes, there's absolutely a correlation. I did a presentation on this. Mine was, I found 40 different instances, and you know what? If I'd kept going, I probably could have found another 100. But Hastings had thousands in his books. So there's definitely a correlation. Nobody's sure exactly what it means. Kevin Newth, Flight Characteristics and Physics of UAP. So Kevin Newth basically went through and tried to break down the flight characteristics of how UAP fly based on the Nimitz encounters. He made a lot of physics assumptions there. One of the things that Jack has pointed out many times is those physics assumptions are based on very linear physics. And once you get into relativistic physics, it makes a lot more sense, right? So,
Yes.
you know, so Kevin was kind of looking at, okay, here's what we see, here's what might be happening. The G forces inside the cabin must be X, Y, or Z. You know, and what Jack had pointed out was, well, if you're modifying the geodesic, there are no G forces in the cabin. So, you know, things along those lines. Tony Robertson, NASA superconductors. Yeah.
Oh, Tim, just wanted to interject one thing. You know, where our focus here is on propulsion. I will be adding a little bit at the end of this conference on the motivations, basically motivational for this propulsion research.
Awesome.
I have
awesome.
a report of new developments in apparently a nuclear holocaust on Mars. New data.
Yeah, and
I'll be reporting that. I gave it at the Mars Society conference. I'll be presenting that here.
I mentioned that actually in the intro as well.
Okay, sorry, I missed.
Oh no, that's okay. Our time schedule is a little flexible today, so
okay,
you know,
very good.
I'll try not to keep you waiting too long. And actually, what I'm trying to do is just rush through these. But superconductor gravity shielding, Ken Griggs.
Tim, I did create a presentation or have it ready. So I don't know. You had me on headlining talking about crop circles and engineering.
At one, did I have you at 1?
I think so. That's
yeah. I'm running way over. Is it okay if I push everything back or?
Sure. Half an hour is probably what I've got prepared with slides and some math models and such. So.
Okay. Well, do you want me to shut things down now, or should I just try and run through all of these?
Let's cut to the chase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, what does cut to the chase mean?
How far do we go?
Put
We
on
got
Mark.
just like 6
Put on Mark
months to-
Sokol. Let the
We're-
games begin.
Okay.
Well, there's
okay.
a presentation before Mark here,
Yeah,
the half hour that he's got. So
Oh, I'm
Tim
sorry.
goes to 2 here, finishing off the last half hour. Then Adam Schaefer's half hour. Then Mark takes away at the lab.
That works for me. Okay. Well, let me bust.
Oh,
If you guys,
pardon me. I thought the schedule was Mark first. So.
I think it was, but Mark got held up again. We're
I understand.
Yeah,
I
real quick,
understand.
guys, you're gonna really want to wait for this. I'm gonna have to log out of this computer and move over to Windows. So I can
No
hook up
worries,
a
Mark.
slow
You got a
speed
lot
camera.
going on there. There's a whole bunch
Yes,
of
check
experiments.
this out.
So take your
You
time.
have the Podkletnov gravity impulse experiment set up behind me. We pulled a vacuum earlier. We got superconductor that was sent to us by Tony Robertson. It's a bilayer one. We're going to be pouring the liquid nitrogen from here. The epoxy's coming in. The epoxy was set last night, actually earlier this morning. And check this out for detection. This is going to be really cool. We're going to capture it on the high-speed camera. Wayne put this together. It's a bunch of lead weight pendulum array. And yeah, we're going to see this on the high-speed camera. After we pulse it, we'll see if there's any shakes or any vibrations caused on these lead weights that are hanging freely and should be roughly in the direction of where the beam is pointing. So we'll be able to see the size, the magnitude of the beam. And this entire rig, by the way, the Helmholtz coils over here are powered by a hybrid battery on the bottom, which is going to be remote controlled. Also, we have going on the Marx generator that's going to be powering it. There's the power supply for it. We're also doing another experiment called Easy Alzofon, which has been not easy at all. And
No experimental work is easy.
it's basically a replication of the ARV. So we got this capacitor bank that George Hathaway sent us, and an aluminum disc in the center that's spinning, and a coil. It's going to be an LC circuit with a spark gap to get it to resonate. And the whole thing is going to be on a mechanical spring scale, and we'll just watch that, see if there's any weight loss.
okay. Well, Mark, let me,
helping us set it up.
if it's okay, let me wrap this up then. Let me try and push through.
We're not ready for this yet. There's still a couple more things that need to be done. So if anyone else has something to present.
Okay, so let's get back to it here.
Sure, that was an awesome updates, right? So
Yeah,
Mark, come through with updates every half hour until you're ready.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. So
Yeah, we'll do updates every half hour. How about that?
okay. So yeah, where was I? Okay. Moving on. I may have missed a couple here. Did I miss any here? Yeah, I did actually. So we've had Jack Sarfati has talked about UAPs, tic-tac technology, super relativity, VEM drive. I'll just run through that. Mark Fiorentino. Mark has been with the conference many times. He had a theory that he presented. David Perez. This is one that Mark had wanted us to do, variable electromagnetic drive. This is the one where the pilot flew into the cloud, came out at a different time, and basically David kind of created a model based around that. Todd has done presentations, Tony as well. Quantum gravity is a quantum warp field. That was a little bit more theoretical in nature. The Vimana Navy UAP encounters and MHD propulsion. So we were really excited about this. The Vimana is kind of out there against one of those historical ideas, right? And so it's kind of like, well, we're able to try and capture this and again share it with the, you know, that next generation of people who are coming up and saying, look, there's historical information about this that's out there. We also had Kevin Day. Kevin presented on his Nimitz Navy UAP encounters. So, you know, we had that. Let me see. Spectral analysis and the Graviflyer. Again, really exciting stuff. Steve Burns made another appearance. He was talking about UAP spectral shifting and negative mass. Let me see. Peter Reale and Hoffman. So we had more SCU people. I think it's important to know we've been really well supported by the SCU, and they support us as well. It's wonderful to have colleagues in that organization who are so helpful. This I believe this was the first one where Charlie presented on Alexei Cherkurkov's Graviflyer. For anybody who has forgotten, so Alexei basically bought a version of the Graviflyer from Cherkurkov. He has been experimenting with it. He's been in contact with Alexei for many, well, a couple of years now, I guess, off and on, trying to get this thing working. And there's a lot of work going on there. Todd has been doing work on the Graviflyer as well. That brings us up. So I don't know if I can get through all these, but we'll do our best. We had more about the Vimana. This was our 1-year anniversary. So we did all of that, all of those amazing topics. That was just the first year, right? So Lifters Brown and Beefield Brown. What I'll do is just run through some of the highlights from each. We had Nick Cook talking about the hunt for 0 point. So again, the hunt for 0 point was tremendous. And to have Nick on talking about what it's like 20 years later and how that's impacted things and what he's learned since then. For anybody who I'm sure everyone here has read that book, they did a second book where they traced Hans Kammler. They basically tracked the guy down, and it appears that at the end of Hunt for 0 point, Hans Kammler disappeared. Where did he go? Well, it would appear that he ended up in Paperclip. That's the idea. Alex Frolov talked about his research. For anybody who's not familiar, Alex Frolov did a journal. Again, this was a magazine in Russia, and he was talking about Russian innovation, same stuff that we're working with, but in Russia from a different background, different assumptions, all that kind of stuff. He did new energy technologies for years, published this. And so it was truly an honor to have him on to talk about what's going on the other side of the globe and what's been done there. For anyone who is interested, there are archives of all of those online. And these were full-size magazines. They were published in English. He had an English version and a Russian version. Bob Grenier also, and Bob did a couple of presentations. So in Bob's case, Bob did these knockdown drag out, right? It was kind of like I'm doing today, where Bob says, yeah, I'll give you an hour, and then he gives you like 3, you know, and you're like, okay, that's it. Slow down, you know. So with Bob, that was really amazing. Let me see. I believe, was that the one we were just on? Yep, that was the one we were just on. Okay. Then we get into quantum communications. So this is an area on my interview channel. If you Google Tim Ventura, you'll learn more. Dr. Yaman Ansbro. This is the one where he basically tracked UAP flight paths. He believed that he found UAPs being deployed from space in regular patterns and doing what he called controlled surveillance of the Earth, right? And so I think for me, that was kind of a revelation. You can draw your own conclusions about that, but Dr. Ansbro is highly credible and has, again, more degrees, honors, and experience than probably anyone has a right to have. And he believes that the Earth is under controlled regular surveillance by UAP. And so that was what that presentation was about. Hugh Deasy had talked about the Deasy-Lorentz system. That was kind of a unique path. Will Riken talked about MHD propulsion, and that's something Will's in Japan. That's something the Japanese have been really excited about. They've done a lot of work in that area. And again, Frank Milburn talking about Canary Island UAP events. Let me see. Pushing forward, I'm going to have to start skipping them. So you guys will have to, come back to this. I'm just going to go to some of the highlights. Detlef Hoyer tried to explain the Hutchison effect in terms of 5D. Again, this is Kaluza-Klein theory. We had Kevin Day talking about Nimitz UAP encounter again. Lucian Ionescu talked about theory of gravity. And Todd, as you can see, Todd also got involved with Graviflyer hypothesis, trying to explain what may or may not be going on there. So after we talked about the Hutchison effect, John Hutchison caught wind of this. And where did he? Yeah, John Hutchison showed up here. And so John actually gave us, I think, like a solid 2 hours on that first day, and he came back as well. We also had more by David Chester on gravity theories and Bob Grenier. Bob has done a couple of presentations. And again, I am moving very rapidly, guys. Casimir effect, plasma vortex, and gyro propulsion. Dr. Fabrizio Pinto. So this was originally a STAFE presentation. This was STAFE 2007, I think. That was where I met Dr. Pinto. And I'd reached out to him and he agreed to do a presentation on that. Casimir effect, basically when you put two plates together, ZPE pushes them closer together. Is it possible to maybe use that for some kind of propulsion? That's something that's been an interest area of his for a long time. Mike Melia, and Mike has done presentations a couple of times on his inertial propulsion experiments, as well as videos. Michael McDonough, who has been a friend and colleague for many, many years, he had talked about the plasma vortex. And again, Michael, he did the work with beta voltaic. It's stimulated beta decay, right? Because there are beta decay batteries. No one disputes that. Bob Lazar actually sells those. You can stimulate beta decay, according to Madonna, and actually speed it up. And I believe that I saw a demonstration of this, even though standard physics says it's not possible. It appears that a high voltage can somehow destabilize the electroweak force under certain conditions and cause decay to speed up. That's the idea, at least.
There have been reports of seasonal variations in radioactive decay. Normally that uses the weak force. So it's one of these things that was reported in a referee journal, and then you never heard about anything more about it.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be possible until it is, and then we spend the next few decades trying to figure out.
I've talked about that a couple times.
Yeah. So let me see. I believe. Oh, and this was the one. Okay. Simulated beta decay. I want to go here. So I twisted Michael's arm and had him talk a little bit more about this. So he was working with this in like 2002, 2005 timeframe. It's been quite a while, but he was able to provide kind of an overview of it. Again, stimulated beta decay is not supposed to exist, but it appears that it does. I had someone show that to me, and it didn't look like they put it on an O-scope and it looked like it worked. So we also had John Hutchison talking about the Hutchison effect. And was that in here? Maybe it's not in here. At one point we had George Hathaway, which was really exciting. And George spent probably close to an hour in a Q&A session talking about that.
Yeah, I think Hathaway was a little bit before Hutchinson. That's what I recall. It's like he was like a week, 2 weeks prior, and then Hutchinson came on.
Oh, it could be. I thought George's presentation was illuminating, because he had talked about George, his focus there was really like he believes that it was connected to Hutchison's state of mind, right? And that's not anything for or against John, but what he felt was John was in, if I remember right, he described at the time, John was in a period of stress and emotional distress and just a lot going on. And the effects seemed to happen more there. And as John moved through things, it went away. That was kind of what he'd seemed to indicate. So let me see. Surfing through here, you guys will have to forgive me if I miss anything. I'm trying to go through way too many of these things way too fast, but we've never done this before. So Ron Evans, gravitomagnetism and its role in gravity propulsion. Ron came back. This is his model, his kind of, and again, this comes out of his green glow experience. He ran through inertia, free fall, Lazar's claims, things along those lines. Ricardo Storti, analysis of Lazar's propulsion claims. So this one, the thing to keep in mind here was Storti is trying to contextualize Lazar's claims in terms of his own model, right? And actually, I've heard a little bit of criticism of that. They're saying, okay, why not try and explain it in terms of standard physics before you put it into your own physics? But regardless of how you may or may not feel about that, the nice thing is he did a really good, solid analysis of what Lazar claimed. And so that's in there. And then he also tried to put it in the context of his own model, right? Which is always kind of a challenge. Let me see. Variable speed of light cosmology. That was, yeah, again, that was Storti. And then, Mr. Brandenburg, introduction to the GEM theory. And let me see, we had Ross Small. We've had Ross Small a few times. Ross is, for anyone who has missed it, Ross is kind of our resident wild man. He has a massive, for lack of a better word, this is a Trojan horse on wheels that threatens to punch the wall of his apartment. He turns it on and we all fear for our lives, and we especially fear for his life. So
I have watched his demonstration. I told him, stand further away from this device.
yes. He's the Evel Knievel of our community. That's the only way to describe it. Hopefully without all the broken bones. So far,
Absolutely.
so good. So let me see. After this, oh, that's right, John. You came back and you talked about, and you're going to talk more about this today, hopefully. Mars nuclear isotopes. There we go.
A story that won't go away. It just gets richer and richer.
Yeah.
And
well,
by the way, you guys are all talking about how we're going to get to Mars and then to the stars. This is your big motivation to get to Mars and then to the stars.
And
when you see what I have been able to deduce from published data,
I would say get to Mars, into the stars, and inherit the stars, because that is the book that would apply to your hypothesis probably the best.
Perhaps so.
So Rupert Wade, funding strategies for innovation, which that's really valuable. That's something that we should talk about more. But pretty much everybody here is an innovator, an experimenter, a lot of entrepreneurs, small business people. And so it helps to have some business knowledge. Rupert Wade is the man, and he's actually still in this area. So, you know, if you haven't thought about it, if you have business questions, he might be somebody to talk to. I talked to him just the other day. I had a question. He was very helpful. He's a wonderful person, very knowledgeable, and a lot of information. His thing right now is a DAO, distributed autonomous something DAO, DAO. It's a distributed autonomous organization, I think. That's a new funding model as well. It's kind of a crowdfunding thing. I think that was what he was saying. That's really
winning
hot.
Through the DAO.
Yeah, it's one of those crypto related things. That's why nobody understands it, but he's on top of those. Rob Chambers talking about the read drive, and this was one of his passion projects. Rob Chambers has been following Larry Reed's work. A lot of people have. So he went through and tried to pull out Larry Reed's description of it. Reed himself is not open to presenting for his own reasons, but Rob was really wonderful there. Jared Gates, you know what, man, it seems like this was just yesterday that he was presenting on this. Jared, I didn't know going into this. I was like, okay, let's take a risk, you know, because he was really mellow. It was like, is he going to even show up? He shows up and he gives this presentation on the TR3B that was just stellar. It was like, holy God, this guy did so much amazing work there, you know? And so, of course, me being the way I am, the first thing I did was I said, Jared, do 5 more of these presentations for me. And so he may at some point, right? But at the very least, we have Jared's warp drives in the TR3B. Jared reminds me, his presentations remind me of Jeremy Reese. They both do incredible research. Frank does the same thing, but Frank is more investigative journalism. In their case, they're more like investigative science, you know, if that makes sense. Oh, Mark crashed MUFON. I forgot about that. This was another. I told you that makes our conference unique. We crash other conferences. He crashed the MUFON conference and had Travis Walton. So we had Travis Walton on the show. You know, I just had somebody mention Travis Walton the other day. They said that this person felt that Walton wasn't abducted. What they felt was that Walton was accidentally killed and ET took him away to put him back together again. How's that?
Well, that's certainly more plausible than the abduction.
Yeah.
Idea.
They said Walton ran up to the UFO and touched it and got himself killed, and that's why they took him away. So they had to put him back together again.
That doesn't qualify as an abduction if you're actually dead when they take you away.
Exactly.
That's just a absconding with a body and then returning it as alive. Yes, that's much more plausible than
You can't believe the movie. You have to get his book and go to his conferences or his discussion at the Roswell thing. But that's what he says is he got too close to the propulsion field and it went to ground through him.
Yeah.
Sure.
Then he was woken up on a ship with short guys fixing him, being telepathic, telling him he had died. So
okay, well there you go. So I did an interview with Miguel Alcubierre. One of the challenges that we have is
Viva Mexico.
Not everyone is open to you know, for stage fright or various reasons. Not everyone is open to a group conference setting, right? And that's in some ways that's tragedy. But what I've tried to do, again, I have my interview channel. What I've tried to do is reach out, especially in cases like that. And you know, if I can't get folks to present, or if it doesn't fit with the conference, or for various reasons, you know, I try and do interviews as well. And that way, we're trying to capture some of that knowledge and history and personality as well. So Miguel Alcubierre was one of those fellows. Hopefully, at some point, he may join us. I've got 10 minutes left. I can rush through this really quick. Julia Mossbridge. I absolutely adore Julia. She is wonderful. I don't know. Yeah. Julia is kind of like a sister. So reverse causality in photons. She has worked on remote viewing. She has worked with Dean Radin, the Noetic Society. She has done tons and tons and tons of work. Again, I can't say enough wonderful things about her. She is just the most thoughtful, wonderful human being, and definitely an expert in her field. So she covered that, and that was not only physics, but also related to psychic events as well, which is kind of on the remote viewing angle of things. David Alzofon came back. Ted Pittman, who was here just last session, talking about the impulse driver. Again, that's inertial propulsion. And I did, again, Ryan Graves was another one of those individuals. I did an interview with him. He did not want to come on APEC. I've asked him 2 or 3 times. Let me see, where was I? So I think that was, yep, Julia. Then we had Shrish Halla, quantum loop anti-inertial propulsion. Shrish has been here several times as well. Jim Bakeen, quantized weight. David Perez, variable electromagnetic drive. So you guys are familiar with these. I think that David, we've had before. Jim had a really good presentation as well as Shrish. Okay. We also got into, so Taylor Cisco presented on magnetic monopole propulsion, clues from UAP trees. These were trees surrounding UAP landing sites. And that's kind of where that came from. And so he was doing an analysis of UAPs, and it appeared that there were magnetic monopoles that were generated or in use. Mr. Boyd, who I am looking at right now, did more UAP. He did a UAP Apache infrared video analysis. Joseph Whiting, vortex ring capacitors.
Hey, Jim.
Yeah.
I just wanted to let you know, I just put a chat comment in my 4th patent on gravitomagnetism published yesterday.
Okay.
So there's a link there, and if you put that number in, you can see it. That you and it.
Oh, yeah, and that's in chat. That is in chat.
Okay.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so actually, we're getting there. Hold on. I think I've almost got this. If I get done on time, wow, that would be amazing. Okay, so Greg Cathcart, compressed time propulsion. Greg has kind of a unique model. Again, one of the things that's really exciting about Greg is he dots his I's and crosses his T's. He does really in-depth research. He has his own unique model. It's difficult to validate these things, but the thing that I loved about Greg was his research and his work is so in-depth, right? And that was really exciting. Jose Ruiz, the nice thing about this was a really good breakdown analysis. He went through and said, okay, what do all of these, like the Searle effect and all these amazing devices have in common, right? Alzofon was one of those as well. He tried to pull out common traits from those. And actually you can see, disrupt equilibrium, energy is extracted out of the disrupted area. So he went through and did that. Wayne Ojala, who is with us today, does water have an anti-gravity phase? And actually Wayne is still working on that. Okay, and let me see.
Lost because it rains from above us.
Yes. I'm not going to tease Wayne on the water.
How does all that water get up there in the sky after all?
Okay, so we're up to August. Holy God, I'm going to get this thing done in 2 hours. I did not know. David Sereda, really exciting. David talked about Boyd Bushman, right? And Boyd passed many years ago. Boyd invented the Stinger missile, which he didn't let any of us forget. He invented that back in the 50s based on his observations of a rattlesnake, because he took a lot of stuff from nature. So if you knew Boyd, you would always know that the Stinger missile was based on a rattlesnake. There are many videos of Boyd talking about Boyd had lens levitation. That was something that he used as an example to show people that this stuff was possible. And he had some other models and stuff as well. Mike Brace, theory of gravity, anti-gravity in everything. Mr. Melia made an appearance to do an update on his inertial propulsion. Brian Sinclair and Ross Small, again, inertial propulsion. And these guys, you might get the impression that these guys are working together. It's because they are. So Ross is he has the enormous Trojan horse, and Brian has like just the heavy metal gearing system, right? But they're both awesome and incredibly intimidating. Getting to September, and I've got 6 minutes left here, so I'm going to try and push through this. This was a big one. James Woodward, Mach effect propulsion. Yes, he was the inspiration for this conference, as Mark Sokol described. Mark and company crashed Woodward's Estes Park and promptly got kicked out. They were not allowed to stay. Anyone who knows Mark knows why that is. And so, so we can't blame Mr. Woodward at all, but it was truly an honor to have Mr. Woodward present on Mach effect propulsion for us. James Woodward needs no introduction. I mean, he's been in Wired magazine, he's been in news all over the world.
I had the honor of working closely with him
Yeah.
as, part of his support group in Fullerton for about a year and a half. And it was a wonderful experience. He's just an eminent and very careful scientist.
And he's been carefully focused. He's been working in a focused, methodical manner for decades.
Yes.
And so Frank Milburn did an update on UAPs and Arrow. This one is close to my heart because, again, I need nerdy stuff that's not propulsion related because you guys have propulsion locked up, so it would be pointless for me. So I got bit by the superluminal quantum communication bug. Very quickly, I did a series of, I think I did 4 interviews on this. I had number 5 scheduled with a Chinese scientist. He had some pressure from his government, so he wasn't able to go through that. But the idea is physics, mainstream physics doesn't believe it's possible to communicate faster than light using quantum entanglement, right? But as it turns out, the president of the John Bell Association feels that it is. So this, I believe,
It's one of these things that's impossible till somebody demonstrates it on a tabletop or across a room.
Yeah,
And then suddenly people will say, well, I actually said that several years ago.
Yeah, I secretly believe that. Okay, then going to October, this was our last one before today. This one, Jeremy Reese was supposed to present. He had some last minute technical difficulties. Ted Pittman took over. Phil Bouchard presented on finite theory. And then Mark Sokol and Keith Earl, actually, these gentlemen kind of saved the day. So Keith Earl actually came down to Mark's lab and visited him, and he did this enormous 2-hour presentation on Alzofon. So guys, that's it. That is 2 years.
Well done, Tim.
And that brings us up to today. This is my first piece of stock art featuring a human being. That's my contribution to our 2-year anniversary. So that probably makes me lame, but that's totally fine.
I think humans are actually very valuable in the scheme of things, myself.
Yeah. Guys, thank you for bearing with me. I did not mean to run an entire hour over time.
That was the miracle marathon, though. That was two years in 2 hours. That's pretty good.
This conference here, just so you guys know, and let me double check. Let me just double check. I believe I'm going to go in here. I labeled them all. That's how I know. This is our 45th conference. This is conference number 45.
Wow.
So in case you guys wonder,
very good.
Round of applause for Tim, as Tim always does for everyone.
Really?
Well, thank you
Give him a
guys.
big hand.
But you know what? You guys should applaud for yourself. Applaud for yourselves. This is your conference, and these are all your presentations that I'm talking about. So, and actually, you guys can hear Bernie talking. I didn't put Bernie on the schedule. Bernie, if you are able to stay later, I would love to have an update on your material as well.
Absolutely.
We got kind of sidetracked. I did not mean to leave you off. We've been trying to make our format less presentation and more experimental, and so I'm all turned around up here. But
right.
So